She had just stepped off her flight, dressed sharp and carrying her suitcase, when two airport cops decided to make her their target. They smirked, handcuffed her in front of everyone, and dragged her into a back room, thinking she was just another easy victim. What they didn't know was that she held one of the highest positions in the FBI, and their careers were seconds away from ending. What really happened? Before we dive in, sit back, relax, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss powerful stories like this. Nah. "Excuse me, ma'am, we need you to step aside," said a loud voice, cutting through the steady buzz of passengers at Atlanta International Airport. It was almost 9:30 p.m., and the last wave of flights was landing. Most people just wanted to get home, but for Rachel Thompson, the night was about to take a sharp turn. She had just pulled her small black suitcase off the baggage carousel when she heard the voice behind her. Rachel, a tall, elegant black woman in her late 50s, turned calmly. She wore a perfectly tailored dark suit, low heels, and a wristwatch that gleamed under the airport lights. Her expression was composed, even though she was clearly tired. She had just flown back from Sacramento, California, where she had given a keynote speech at a national conference on Homeland Security. The trip had been intense, filled with long meetings, tight schedules, and important discussions. Even so, Rachel carried herself with quiet authority, the kind that came from decades of serving in high-stakes federal positions. Two uniformed airport police officers stood in front of her. One was an older white man with a heavy gut, narrowed eyes, and a smirk that hinted at smugness. Officer Brad Jenkins. Next to him stood a younger white officer, tall, lean, and tense, Officer Derek Wyatt. Jenkins looked her up and down like he was sizing her up. "Just a quick check," he said. "Nothing to worry about. Standard procedure." Rachel nodded, though she found the timing odd. She hadn't triggered any alarms. Her suitcase had passed through TSA screening like everyone else's. "Is there a specific concern?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. Wyatt stepped a little closer. "We just want to ask a few questions about your luggage," he said, glancing pointedly at her suitcase, her designer bag, and her wristwatch. Rachel blinked once, her eyes narrowing slightly. This wasn't routine. Something about their tone, their posture, their assumption. It felt off. But she didn't show it. Not yet. "I'm happy to answer any questions," she said, "but I'd like to know what this is about." Neither officer gave her a clear answer. Instead, Jenkins gave a little nod to Wyatt, the kind that said something more was coming. And Rachel, seasoned and sharp, felt the tension rise. Something wasn't right. Officer Jenkins folded his arms and stared at Rachel's suitcase like it held something illegal. His eyes shifted slowly to her Coach handbag, then to her Rolex watch. "That's a pretty nice watch," he said, his voice thick with sarcasm. "You travel light, but you sure carry expensive things." Rachel didn't react. She had heard comments like that before, the kind that weren't really about watches or bags. They were about who she was, and more importantly, who they assumed she wasn't. But she stayed calm. Years of experience in law enforcement and intelligence had taught her how to read people fast. And these two officers didn't seem interested in facts. They were reading her like a target, not a traveler. Officer Wyatt walked a slow circle around her, eyeing the suitcase. "Mind telling us what's inside?" he asked. "Work documents, a few clothes, basic personal items," Rachel answered without hesitation. Her voice was even, clear. "I was on a 4-day business trip." Jenkins let out a small chuckle. "A business trip, huh? All by yourself?" "Yes, that's correct." He looked at Wyatt, then back at Rachel. "And where exactly did you fly in from?" "Sacramento. I attended a national security conference." Jenkins tilted his head. "That's so? Funny, you don't exactly scream government." Rachel met his gaze without flinching. "I don't need to." Wyatt shifted his weight from one foot to the other. He wasn't smiling anymore. "Look, this doesn't have to be difficult. We're just doing our job. Sometimes people try to bring in things they shouldn't. I understand, Rachel said. But if you have no probable cause or specific evidence, I'd prefer not to be singled out. The tension thickened. Jenkins gave a tight smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. We'll see about that, he muttered, already sizing up his next move. Rachel could feel it. The questions weren't about luggage. They were about power. And they were just getting started. Jenkins glanced down at Rachel's suitcase once more, then gave a long, exaggerated sigh. Thing is, he said slowly, our K9 unit passed through this area just a few minutes ago. The dog signaled something unusual around this carousel. Rachel raised an eyebrow. I didn't see any dog. Wyatt shrugged. You wouldn't. They move through quickly. You probably didn't notice. That's interesting, Rachel replied calmly. Because I was standing here the whole time, and there hasn't been any dog patrol near me or this baggage carousel. Jenkins's smirk returned. Look, ma'am, you can either cooperate or we can do this the hard way. We have reason to suspect your suitcase may contain prohibited items. Drugs, unreported cash, maybe something worse. You'd be surprised what people try to carry. Rachel stared at him, her expression unreadable. I don't have anything illegal, and unless you're willing to show me real evidence, I suggest you stop harassing me. That word, harassing, seemed to hit a nerve. Jenkins's face darkened. He took a step closer, invading her personal space. I'd watch your tone, lady. You're not the one in control here. Before Rachel could respond, he gave a sharp nod to Wyatt. In one quick, aggressive motion, Wyatt stepped behind her, grabbed her left wrist, twisted it behind her back, and yanked her other arm to follow, cold steel clamped tightly onto her wrists. You are being detained for further investigation, Wyatt said, his voice loud and forceful. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Gasps echoed from nearby passengers. A couple stopped mid-step, watching in disbelief as this well-dressed woman in her late 50s, poised, calm, and clearly professional, was handcuffed like a criminal in the middle of the terminal. Rachel winced slightly at the pressure, but didn't resist. She knew better than to struggle. It would only feed into whatever twisted narrative they were building. Instead, she stood still, breathing slowly, steadying herself. Her hands throbbed from the tight grip of the cuffs, but her face remained composed. Jenkins leaned in close. We'll take a little walk, he said almost smugly. You and us. We'll have a nice, quiet chat away from all these people. Rachel didn't speak, but the look she gave him, cool, piercing, and full of restrained fire, made even Jenkins flinch for half a second. It was a look that said, asterisk. You just made a very big mistake. Asterisk. As they led her away from the baggage claim area, her suitcase left behind, the crowd slowly parted. No one stepped forward to help. No one questioned it out loud. But more than one person pulled out their phones, recording quietly. Rachel walked steadily between the two officers, her shoulders square, her heels clicking against the tile floor. She'd faced tougher rooms than this. She'd outmaneuvered hostile interrogators, foreign agents, and high-stakes threats. But this was different. This was home. And tonight, home had turned on her. They led Rachel down a quiet hallway away from the crowded terminal. The fluorescent lights above flickered slightly as the sound of their footsteps echoed against the tiled floor. The room they stopped at was tucked in a far corner of Terminal B, small, dim, and clearly underused. No windows, one camera barely hanging from the ceiling. A metal table and two folding chairs sat in the middle, surrounded by gray cinder block walls. It didn't feel like a standard security checkpoint. It felt hidden. Wyatt opened the door and motioned her in. Jenkins followed behind, closing the door with a loud click. Rachel remained calm, though the handcuffs were still cutting into her wrists. She stood silently as the two officers circled her like hawks. Jenkins leaned against the table, arms crossed. Now look, I don't know who you think you are, But this doesn't have to be a mess, he said. We don't want to keep you longer than necessary. Rachel looked at him, saying nothing. You cooperate with us, tell us what we need to know, and we'll see about letting you go without making this official, Jenkins continued, his voice slow and suggestive. No paperwork, no delays, no trouble. Wyatt added, You get us on the same page, and we'll all walk out of here like nothing happened. Rachel raised an eyebrow. What exactly do you expect me to say? Jenkins smiled, but it wasn't kind. You seem like someone who understands how things work. People bring in stuff. Sometimes they forget to declare it, sometimes it's cash. Jewelry, business deals. We just want to make sure things are clear. You're fishing, Rachel said plainly, and you're hoping I'll panic and hand you something I don't have. The room went quiet. Wyatt shifted uncomfortably. Jenkins straightened up. Suit yourself, he said, voice harder now. But this attitude won't help you. If you'd rather have this escalated, we can file the full report. TSA, DEA, even federal prosecutors. They're all a call away. Rachel stood still. She didn't show fear. But in her silence was a warning, a storm building behind her composed stare. She wasn't afraid. She was calculating, and they had no idea who they were dealing with. Rachel didn't move right away. She let the silence stretch, her eyes fixed on Jenkins. Then, without raising her voice, she said, I want to make a phone call. Wyatt snorted. This isn't a hotel, ma'am. Detainees don't just get to make calls whenever they feel like it. Jenkins raised a hand, stopping his partner. Let her. Maybe she's ready to talk to someone who can talk some sense into her. He turned to Rachel. One call, on speaker, right here. Rachel gave a small nod. Fine. Jenkins took a step forward and reached toward her bag, but Rachel stopped him with a calm, firm look. The phone is in the inside pocket. I'll get it, slowly. He hesitated, then gave her a slight nod. Wyatt uncuffed her, but only one wrist. Rachel moved slowly and deliberately, reaching into her handbag and pulling out a slim black smartphone. Her fingers moved quickly but confidently as she dialed a number from memory. The officers exchanged a glance. They expected her to call a lawyer or maybe a relative, someone to beg for help, someone to pay them off quietly. Instead, she placed the phone on the table, pressed speaker, and held it still. The call rang once. Then a deep, professional male voice answered. Federal Bureau of Investigation, Washington, D.C., Executive Command Center. Who's calling? Rachel spoke clearly. This is Rachel Thompson, Deputy Executive Director. I'm being unlawfully detained in Private Security Room 4, Terminal B, at Atlanta International Airport by 2 airport police officers. Badge numbers? She paused briefly, turned toward the men, and read each badge aloud with chilling accuracy. Officer Brad Jenkins and Officer Derek Wyatt. I have been handcuffed without cause, denied legal rights, and subjected to implied extortion under the false claim of contraband possession. I request immediate review and intervention. There was silence in the room for a second. Then, from the other end of the call, Understood. Hold this line. Help is en route. Wyatt blinked. Wait. What? Jenkins looked stunned. Your FBI? Rachel turned to face them. You never asked. The color drained from both their faces. Wyatt took a step back. Jenkins opened his mouth, then closed it again, as if unsure whether to apologize or defend himself. His usual smugness was gone. In its place was something close to panic. Rachel didn't say another word. She picked up the phone, ended the call, and placed it gently on the table. She didn't have to explain. The name she gave, and the line she had called, spoke volumes. Now it was just a matter of time, and Rachel Thompson was very good at waiting when she knew justice was coming. For a few seconds, no one in the room spoke. The air had shifted. Jenkins and Wyatt stood stiffly, as if unsure what to do next. Rachel sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, her expression calm but unreadable. Then Jenkins's phone buzzed. He glanced down. One call, then another, then a third, all from numbers marked restricted. He hesitated before picking up. "Officer Jenkins," he said, his voice shaky. A loud voice came through, even audible from where Rachel sat. It was fast, sharp, and clearly angry. "Is it true? You have Deputy Director Thompson in custody? What in the world are you thinking?" Jenkins stammered. I didn't know who she was. We thought there was a security concern." "Shut up and listen," the voice snapped. "Put her on the line. Now." Jenkins looked at Rachel, completely deflated. He held out the phone like a child caught red-handed. Rachel took it, stood slowly, and answered. "This is Thompson." There was a pause on the line. Then the voice softened just a bit. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry. We've already dispatched a response team. Please stay in the room. No one else will touch you. Is that clear?" "Crystal," Rachel said, then handed the phone back to Jenkins without another word. He didn't even look at her. He put the phone down on the table, then took a step back like he was trying to disappear. Wyatt stood frozen, his face pale. Just minutes later, the hallway outside filled with footsteps. The door opened sharply. 3 individuals stepped inside, one in a dark suit with a badge on his belt, the other 2 in official airport security uniforms, clearly higher ranking. One of them held a file folder. The man in the suit spoke first. "Miss Thompson, we apologize for what you've experienced. Please come with me." Rachel nodded once and walked past Jenkins and Wyatt without even glancing at them. As she stepped out of the room, she heard the suit say, "Officers Jenkins and Wyatt, your weapons, badges, and access cards. Now." Rachel didn't need to look back. She didn't need to see the panic or hear their excuses. It was over. Not just for tonight, for their entire careers. And for the first time since landing, Rachel allowed herself a deep, steady breath. She wasn't just free. She was in control again. The hallway outside the small security room was quiet now, but the tension still hung in the air. Rachel walked calmly beside the senior federal official who had come to escort her. 2 plainclothes agents followed behind, keeping a watchful eye on everything and everyone they passed. Rachel didn't say much. She didn't have to. Her composure alone said enough. As they made their way to the administrative wing of the airport staff stepped aside, some whispering to each other, others simply staring with wide eyes. Word was spreading fast. Something serious had just happened. And not to just anyone. Back in the security room, Officer Jenkins and Officer Wyatt stood against the wall, their hands stiff at their sides. The senior airport commander faced them directly. "Remove your weapons," the commander ordered. The 2 officers hesitated. Then slowly, Wyatt unclipped his holster and placed his firearm on the table. Jenkins did the same. One by one, they removed their handcuffs, radios, and badge wallets. The table quickly filled with the tools of their authority, now stripped away. "You are both being placed on immediate administrative leave, pending federal investigation," the commander continued. "Internal Affairs will conduct a full review. You are not to leave the area until instructed otherwise." Jenkins opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came. Wyatt looked at the floor. Meanwhile, Rachel was seated comfortably in a private office upstairs. A bottle of water had been placed gently on the table beside her. A senior agent handed her a written apology signed by the airport's director. Another official arrived to personally collect her formal statement. She gave it calmly and thoroughly, recalling every detail. The smirks, the lies, the handcuffs, the implied bribe. Her memory was sharp, her voice steady. Every fact was clear, each word carefully chosen. By the time she finished, her suitcase had already been retrieved, and the footage from nearby security cameras had been secured for evidence. There would be no cover-up this time. Too many people had seen, and even more were now involved. Rachel stood, smoothed her jacket, and walked toward the exit. She didn't look angry. She looked resolved. Justice had begun, and she wasn't going to stop until it was finished. By the next morning, the incident had reached the desks of top officials at the Department of Justice. A formal inquiry was launched within hours. The Office of Professional Responsibility began interviewing airport staff, reviewing surveillance footage, and collecting previous reports involving officers Jenkins and Wyatt. What they uncovered painted a disturbing pattern. There had been complaints before, quiet ones, informal ones that got lost in the shuffle. A tourist from Spain reported being aggressively questioned for carrying too much cash. A young college student said she was detained without reason and pressured to surrender her electronics. A retired couple from Chicago had claimed they were falsely told their luggage tested positive for narcotics and were only released after cooperating with the officers. The pattern was clear: intimidation, coercion, and targeting people who seemed less likely to fight back. But none of those victims had the authority or the voice of Rachel Thompson. This time, the accusations were backed by irrefutable evidence. The security camera footage captured Rachel calmly retrieving her suitcase, the officers approaching without any clear reason, the unnecessary escalation, and the moment she was handcuffed without resisting. Audio from the security room, recorded through an internal microphone system, captured the suggestive language used by Jenkins and the lack of due process in their approach. Faced with overwhelming facts, both officers were interviewed separately. Wyatt, under pressure, broke first. He admitted that they had no direct cause to stop Rachel, and that Jenkins had encouraged him to play along with what he called a soft shake. Jenkins, cornered and without any legal defense, followed suit. Both were immediately charged with unlawful detention, abuse of power, and civil rights violations. A federal judge later added conspiracy to extort, citing their language and behavior during the incident. The trial was swift. With Rachel's testimony the evidence and the renewed national focus on law enforcement misconduct, there was little room for leniency. The court sentenced Brad Jenkins and Derek Wyatt to 8 years each in federal prison. No parole, no early release. Their law enforcement careers were over. Their pensions were revoked. Their names would forever be associated with the very corruption they thought they'd get away with. Rachel did not attend the sentencing hearing. She didn't need to. Justice had already spoken, not just for her, but for every person who had ever been silenced, ignored, or brushed aside. The courtroom may have handed down the sentence, but the real power was in what Rachel represented. The quiet strength of someone who knew the law, used it correctly, and demanded accountability, not with fists, but with facts. In the weeks that followed the trial, Rachel returned to her office at FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C., not as someone looking to move past the incident, but as someone determined to turn it into action. She wasn't interested in revenge. She wanted change. Real, measurable, lasting change. Using her position as Deputy Executive Director, Rachel began pushing for a new federal policy review. Her focus was clear: stronger oversight of airport law enforcement agencies, mandatory training on civil rights and anti-discrimination practices, and the establishment of a secure whistleblower system for travelers and staff. She knew that her experience, while deeply personal, was not unique. What made her different was that she had the platform and the influence to do something about it. She met with senior officials at the Department of Homeland Security, the FAA, and the Department of Justice. Each meeting was direct, professional, and unapologetically firm. Rachel brought not only her story, but also the stories of the others who came forward after her case became public. Some were quiet voices from years past, finally brave enough to speak. Others were newly emboldened to share what they had witnessed or endured. With her guidance, a new policy framework was introduced under a joint federal task force. It included a mandatory annual review of all airport police departments, federal-level oversight on serious complaints, and a standardized recording system for all detention incidents in secure airport areas. No more back rooms with broken cameras, no more vague excuses, no more silence. Rachel also helped create a public awareness campaign called Rights in Transit, which educated travelers on what they could legally refuse, request, and report during airport screenings and encounters. Posters went up in terminals, QR codes linked to hotlines, and within months, complaint reports decreased, not because misconduct stopped entirely, but because the system was finally watching. Rachel never made a media tour. She declined TV interviews and politely turned down talk show invitations. That wasn't her style. She believed in quiet leadership. Her story, she said, was not about one woman standing up. It was about building a system where no one would ever need to. Among her staff, she became known for a phrase she'd often say in meetings: "Power is not in the badge. It's in how you use the law to protect, not to control." And for those who worked alongside her, younger agents, interns, new recruits, Rachel Thompson wasn't just the woman who brought down 2 corrupt officers. She was the one who made sure it wouldn't happen again. Not on her watch. Not ever again. Rachel Thompson's story reminds us that justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it speaks through calm resolve, quiet strength, and unwavering integrity. In a world where power is too often misused, Rachel proved that true authority comes from knowing your rights and having the courage to defend them, not just for yourself, but for others who can't. Her actions sparked real change, not because she raised her voice, but because she refused to be silent. We all have a role to play in making our systems more fair, more accountable, and more humane. Whether you're a leader, a traveler, or just someone watching from afar, remember, your voice matters. And when used with wisdom and purpose, it can shift the balance. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you think twice about the power of standing firm in the face of injustice, don't keep it to yourself. Subscribe to our channel so you won't miss the next powerful story that reminds us what courage, dignity, and real leadership look like in everyday life.